Hello, friends, and welcome. I'm your co-host, Andrew Lazaga, here with Dubside.
And you're listening to the Dubcast with Dubside.
Hey, Dubside, I really enjoyed your last episode cataloging your kayak injuries.
All right, thanks. Hope it was educational to some extent.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you started out talking about shoulder injuries. Shoulder injuries are something that I worry about a lot. They can be devastating to kayakers, but at the same time, they're also preventable because they're mostly related to poor technique, as you had pointed out.
Yeah, sticking your arm way up out in the air kind of thing, and when the force of the paddle hits that takes your shoulder right out of joint, or doing a roll the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that a lot of them are related to doing high braces.
Yeah.
In fact, some people have recommended not doing a high brace at all to prevent a capsize because of that risk. And actually, they recommend completely capsizing and rolling to recover.
Well, yeah, if you got a good roll, yeah, what's the point of trying to stay up at all costs? Just go under and come back up.
Yeah. And, years ago, this was a memorable incident that was reported in Sea Kayaker Magazine. It happened outside of Victoria, BC, where a sea kayaker was in rough water and he did a high brace and dislocated his shoulder while he was a mile offshore. And he capsized, was out of his boat, and couldn't get back in because he could only use one arm. So he had to be rescued.
Mm-hmm.
And another case that I saw personally was when I was out in Trinidad, California. I was out there with Sterling Donaldson.
Okay.
And a woman had dislocated her shoulder. I think probably while playing in the rock gardens out there.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Trinidad?
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
It's a cool location.
There's some serious water though.
Yeah. It's a neat location because south of Trinidad Head is protected. It has a bunch of rocks, which are great for playing in.
Yeah.
And then north of that, you get some big swell. And there's some islands and some nice surf beaches. Well, she was on the beach, in a great deal of pain. Shoulder was dislocated, but they were able to get it back by using this technique where they had her bend over and with the affected arm had her hold on to a heavy rock and just gently swing her arm around in a small circle while bending over. And the rock provided enough weight and stretch on the shoulder muscles that after a few minutes it just popped right back into the joint.
Yeah, I've heard about that, and I've maybe seen in first aid classes that demonstrate it. I don't, not entirely up on it to describe it or recommend it. People do it to my description, but there are those techniques that are very effective. The sooner you can get it back in, the less troublesome it'll be for the person.
Yeah, I was impressed. I'd never seen it done before. I should issue a disclaimer. This is not medical advice. Mm-hmm. Although I am a doctor, I don't usually advertise that fact, but I'd never heard of that technique, and orthopedics is definitely not one of my strong points. I've only really seen shoulder reductions done under general anesthesia when all other attempts have failed. So, but it'd be good to know a technique like that when you're out in the field in case you run up against someone who had a shoulder dislocation.
Yeah.
Now, we should talk about recovering while having a shoulder dislocation.
Yeah, well, in trying to come up with rolling scenarios, I did hit on the idea that if you dislocate your shoulder, then you just have one arm to roll up with. And if you got a paddling hand, there's the butterfly roll and there's the shotgun roll. Super worst case scenario, your paddle gets dropped or blows away, and you dislocate your shoulder, and you get turned over, and the wind is blowing really strong on one side of the kayak. And so, if you're trying to come up against the wind, it's very difficult. And so, if the shoulder that's dislocated is the side that the wind is blowing against, your other arm is having trouble getting up on that, on the opposite side because the wind is pushing you back down. But as hard as it makes on one side, it makes it that much easier on the other side. So The roll I came up with, I call it the opposite arm roll, where you roll. Say you're trying to come up on the left side, but your left arm is dislocated. So just using your right arm, you're doing a hand roll on the left side, and it can be done. It's a difficult one, but it's not impossible.
Wow. A hand roll on the left side.
Yeah, and so the you can also do it with a north side throwing stick, but with a hand roll, it can also be done with practice. And the thing is, if you can't quite do it, if you can almost get it, that's good enough. Because the only time you'll need to use it is if it doesn't work on the good side because of the wind, and the wind will make it that much easier on the hard side. So it'll work.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
you're trying to come up with your right hand, a hand roll, and if you come up on the right side, you're fine. But if you can't come up because the wind keeps blowing you back, then you just shift around and come up on the left side, and the wind is going to help you that much more. So it's going to be that much easier. So even if you don't quite have the technique of flat water, it'll be good enough in real world situation with the wind.
Yeah. Definitely something to practice.
If you can follow that wording.
Is that a forward finishing roll?
I used to do it as a layback roll.
Okay.
The one arm just sort of does this kind of windmill kind of thing because it comes over to your right arm crosses over to the left side to bring you up, and then flings itself back out on the other side like the high arm on a butterfly kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, good. The other personal example I have of an injury was actually a true medical emergency. And this happened during a BCU 4-star class that I was taking with Sean and Leon of Bodyboat Blade in Nia Bay. You know Sean and Leon.
Yeah.
Well, we were out on the first day, or practicing surfing, and really getting kind of pounded out in the surf. And one of the students seemed wasn't really feeling very well, and kind of sat out, half of the morning. And they thought that maybe he was suffering from hypothermia. So we got him to the beach, warmed him up, gave him something warm to drink. And Sean and Leon approached me and said, he's not really feeling that well. Could you, give us an opinion?
Yeah.
And he was feeling weak, and he said that his lungs were hurting.
Mm.
So I said, I don't know what's going on, but I recommend give him an aspirin to chew and swallow, and get him to the clinic, get him to the nearest clinic. And Nia Bay is basically a small Indian village, and it's about a couple hours away from the next hospital, right?
Yeah.
Well, it turned out that they took him to the clinic. He was having a massive heart attack,
Really?
and they immediately airlifted him to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle for emergency coronary artery stenting.
Yeah.
And he ended up with 3 stents. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So, have you ever been with someone who's been having what's called a major cardiac event?
No, unfortunately not yet.
Well,
I mean, I do. I had all the CPR classes and all that, and update all that stuff all the time. But you forget that stuff if you never use it. So
yeah.
but yeah.
Well, one thing you need to know about people who are having heart attacks, what we call myocardial infarctions, is that they are often in complete denial of the seriousness of their condition. And this guy actually suggested that if we just leave him alone at the motel, he might feel well enough to later drive himself to have himself checked out. And I was saying, no, you really need to be seen, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And it's easy to have them convince you that they're not having a problem. Yeah. So you need to not be contaminated by their denial.
Yeah.
One thing I learned in that situation is that you need to assume the worst in those situations. Yep. Because it is a life-threatening situation. And he eventually wrote into Sea Kayaker Magazine a letter. Basically, it was about that he was very lucky that his insurance paid for the medical evacuation, because otherwise he'd be stuck with a bill for about $20,000 for the helicopter ride.
Oh, is that all?
I
Yeah.
don't remember. It was
Helicopters
something like
cost big bucks. Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Mm.
So how's your summer looking out? You
Oh, I'll be heading off to I got this non-kayak thing in Colorado. Then I'm going to the Michigan training camp event that hasn't happened since COVID started. So I'll be happy to get back to that. But the week before on my schedule, they wanted me to come to in Denmark. It's the Danish uh, Kayak Federation has their championship thing. Part of that is rolling, and part of this is other maneuvering thing. I've been to a number of those in the past years, and they move it around to different towns. But so this is some town way outside of Copenhagen. They wanted me to come, but I just didn't have enough work to make it worthwhile to travel over there. But the message came back that they've been enjoying listening to the Dubcast. So
great.
I appreciate that. Shout out to all my Danish fans out there. When I talk about things like Tivoli and things, they know exactly what I'm. They don't need any explanation. So
All right.
glad to hear that people are paying attention out there.
We have a worldwide audience. I just want to say that we really appreciate our listeners out there. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you're having a great summer kayaking, rolling, camping, building kayaks, or whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, without further ado, here is Dubcast number 29, which is about navigating through the minefield of cultural misunderstandings.
Welcome to the Dubcast with Dubside. This is Dubcast number 29. We will look at cultural differences and how to navigate cultural differences and avoid misunderstandings and embarrassment. My experience with Greenland culture will be our example. And I have music this week from a group called Kuslek. That's Q-U-L-L-E-Q. Kuslek. The song is called Upernanguara. I'll give you the translation of those words later. Well, I'm going to start off with a story concerning Greg Stamer, who I've mentioned before was the first president of Kayak USA. And Greg attended the Greenland competition in 2000, the first year it was open to foreigners, and also again in 2002. And at one point during his stay there, he heard that some of the guys were going to go hunt seals the next day, doing it by motorboat and rifles, as is done these days. And Greg was very interested in seeing how the hunting was done, so he asked them if he could go with them. And they said he could. They'd be leaving the next morning, and he was welcome to come and watch them hunt seals. Well, the next morning he got up probably somewhat early, pretty excited, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited, and none of the guys ever came to take him to hunt seals. It didn't happen. And he felt rather put off. You know, if they didn't really want him to go, they could have said, "You can't go," and not just snub him like that by not showing up. Well, in time, Greg came to understand culture a little bit better, and I certainly would have made the same mistake. But knowing what I know now, I can pretty much see what happened. See, from Greg's perspective, he said, "I told you I want to go join you on this hunt, and you didn't follow through, so that's on you." Well, the Greenlanders saw it a different way. They felt that you asked us if you could go hunt with us, and we said you could, and we said we were leaving tomorrow morning. That is all you need to know. If you really want to go, with that information, you can hook it up, because everybody knows that we hunt seals from a motorboat. Everybody knows, any Greenlander with common sense knows where the marina is. These are open boats. We're not inside anything. You could see us from a quarter mile away. Just look out over the marina. You can see where we are. We don't have to tell you exactly where our boat is. You can find it. And tomorrow morning, that's what we said. So you'll just show up in the morning and you'll see us there, and then we'll go. If you expected us to come find you in the morning and lead you by the hand down to the marina, sorry, dude, we don't work that way. We went there. And just before we shoved off, we took a look around. We didn't see you anywhere on the horizon, so we figured, all right, he doesn't want to go or he got busy, so no problem. We'll go ahead and hunt without him. So that's the kind of misunderstanding that can occur when you make assumptions about what other people should or shouldn't do based on your own point of reference without understanding their culture. I'll give you another example of this kind of misunderstanding. A few years after I'd started helping judge the competition and helping them set up and run things, we were in Ilulissat, I think this was 2013, and there was a guy there named Mikkel, Danish guy who was from Sisimiut, and he'd been an English teacher. He still was an English teacher at the time, so he'd spent the full years there interacting with the Greenlanders and knew a good deal more about Greenland than I did. And in Ilulissat, at the end of the competition, they had decided that the next year it would be held in Sisimiut. And so the local Sisimiut club then would be in charge of all the work that had to be done to set it up and run the competition. And so there was some of the older guys, the elders of the club, were in charge there. And I told Mikkel that, I'd come early, like I'd be willing to come early and help them set things up if that would, be of use to them. And he said, well, let's talk to one of the elder guys about that. And since Mikkel could speak Danish, then he could translate to Danish what I was saying, and I could talk directly to the elder, which I usually have to just sort of try to figure out what people mean about things without being able to talk to them directly. So this was a good opportunity. So we went and found the older guy in charge of Kayak Sisimiut to ask him about next year. Well, at that point, it had been held twice. I'd been to Sisimiut for a competition before that, so I had some idea of the way things were done, but they didn't always use the same location for the ropes and the rolling and the races. So my first question was, where are you going to be setting the ropes up for the ropes competition, Astronaya Katarnak? And Mikkel translated that, and it came back, well, we don't know yet. And then I said, well, where the rolling, where you're going to do the rolling, where's that going to be stationed at? And the answer came back, we don't know yet. And I said, well, are the races going to be, are you going to run them from the marina or over by where the club is, or where is that going to be? And the word came back, we don't know yet. And I said, well, is there going to be electrical power, where the ropes are set up? And they said, well, and everything I asked, every detail, they would just say, well, we don't know yet. And I couldn't get any useful information to prepare, for the next year. So I said, all right, well, I'll come, but we'll see what happens. And the next day, Mikkel, I was talking to him, and he said, Dubs, I think I'd recommend that you not come next year. And I said, what? What do you mean? And he said, well, the guy you talked to, he didn't, he wasn't, didn't like what you were asking him. So like Greg's misunderstanding, the previous example, see, I felt that, if you want me to come, I need some information so I can prepare better. If I know I can plug in power where the ropes are, that it orients me in that way. And then if I, know where the various places they've had the things in the past, I just want to know where these things are so I can plan with, that's just how I think, I want to plan ahead. But the way they think is it's a year ahead of time, and we haven't worked that stuff out. And so much can change between now and then. We're not going to plan that much detail far in advance because we're just going to have to change the plan anyway. So, we just let it go till it's time to work these things out, and then things will happen. So for me to ask the older guy all these detailed questions a year ahead of time, he took that as that's kind of implying that you people don't know what you're doing. You need me to nail you down on these details because I'm a better planner, kind of thing. And it was offensive to him that this foreigner is getting in their business about all these things they haven't even worked out yet because it's way too early. And after I'd thought about it for a bit and tried to comprehend would this guy not want me to come next year, I realized I had been totally inappropriate, way out of line to ask those kind of questions. The proper thing to say would have been, I'll come early next year to help. Okay. And leave it at that. And even exactly how early to come, I would just figure that out and just show up and be ready to, improvise using whatever resources you can find to make it work. But asking the kind of questions I was asking was imposing my way of doing things, my way of planning things on them, which is way out of bounds. Well, I did end up going the next year. I had other friends, other contacts who were expecting to see me and who I hadn't offended. And actually, Mikhail and I did something very cool that I'll tell you about in a future Dubcast by just seizing an opportunity that we hadn't planned for and just going with it, which is the Greenland way. So when considering different ways of doing things, there are moral standards and there are cultural standards. And so, moral standards would be, say, murder or child abuse, things that we can universally condemn. But cultural standards, you get into more gray areas of what you might think is right or what a different culture might think is right. Now, we have standards in the U.S. Regarding the treatment of animals. And, if I were to take my dog and chain it up outside and feed it every 2 or 3 days and never take it for a walk, somebody would probably call the SPCA on me. Well, in Greenland, in the northern towns where they have the Greenland sled dogs, that is standard practice. In the summertime, when there's no sleds to pull, you chain your dog up, you leave it there, you do not walk it, you leave it there 24 hours a day, and you take food out to it maybe every 2 or 3 days. They look at sled dogs a different way from the way we look at dogs. Mikhail, the Danish guy, he in Sisimiut, he had gotten one of the sled dogs from when it was a puppy, and he raised it like a pet. And he had it on a leash, and in the summertime he would walk it around through the town, and the kids were fascinated. They would come up and they would just very timidly want to just touch it just a little teeny bit. And this was unusual because from years and years back, hundreds of years back, generations, the kids were always brought up, from when they could first ever, even comprehend anything, said you do not get anywhere near the dogs. Stay away from the dogs. And that is because the dogs were hungry enough, if they got a hold of a little baby, whether it was human or anything else, they would eat it. So for their own safety, the kids were warned to stay clear of the dogs. I'll give you another situation. I was in Asiat, and some of the other Americans that went to compete that year were staying at a house that was farther back into the neighborhoods, the residential areas. And you'd walk to get there. It would take you, 20 minutes or so to go from where the competition dinners and things, meals were held. And so walking through these neighborhoods, you'd see that, people would have an old beat-up motorboat up on blocks in front of the house, or an old snowmobile that might have been in disrepair or just stored there for the winter, or just other clutter in the yards. And someone said, they should clean up their houses better. It would look nicer if they would just get rid of some of this clutter. Now that sort of relates to the first time I went to Greenland. I felt that they should have posted better schedules and more up-to-date information about when things would be held, and if they changed the order of the competition. We were left in the dark, and I felt they should have given us better knowledge of just the planning of, or the scheduling of things and when things are supposed to happen. So the common thread in these different stories is whether it was thinking that the Greenlanders should have come to Greg to show him where to go hunt seals, or me thinking they should plan their thing in advance in more detail, or someone thinking they should clean up the yards more, make it look more tidy, or me thinking they should post better scheduling information. What ties all those together, and this is the toolkit element that you need to bear in mind to navigate the Greenland culture. It is that word should, S-H-O-U-L-D, should. Whenever the word should enters your mind, what you need to do is stop and ask yourself 3 questions. Okay? First question, are you a bona fide expert in whatever the matter is at hand? Expert as in, where did you get your PhD from? Question number 2, have you considered the context of the situation, given that it is a different culture, a different geography, a different history of tradition? It's a unique situation that may be from a different set of experiences than you are accustomed to. Question number 3, and this is probably the most important one, is anyone asking you for your opinion? If the answer to any of those questions, or all those questions, or even one of those questions, if the answer is no, then I recommend that you shut up, watch and listen, and then you might learn something. All right, so let's put this tool to practice. So we're in Greenland, one of the northern towns, and we see dogs all chained up, not let out to walk, and fed infrequently. So that calls for they should walk these dogs, they should feed them more often, they'd be more healthy. Well, there's that word should walk the dogs, should feed them more often. Okay, should is the trigger. So let's stop here for a second. All right, have we got an expert, who's got the degree in, what is that, veterinary science or something? No degree there? Okay, that's a no for that question. Question 2, the context here, this being a different history, different culture, different geography. These are sled dogs. These aren't pet dogs. A different situation here. The use of these sled dogs has evolved over generations, so we're not just assuming the way we think of dogs from where we come from. Well, we haven't really considered the situation here, so there's a no to that question. And the third question, is anyone asking our opinion at the moment? And the answer there is another no. Therefore, it's time to shut up and watch and listen, and maybe we will learn something. Now, if you have big money and want to stay in the fancy hotel, there are areas in Greenland that look very nice and are tourist-friendly, extremely. And there are other areas for people on my budget that are cheaper. And to get to those places, you may be walking through some areas and look around and say, this is awfully cluttered. They should clean this up a little bit better. Well, there's that word should. All right. So who's got the PhD in, what is this, like real estate or landscaping or urban planning? Okay, well, I certainly don't have a PhD in that. Second question, this particular cultural situation here is different. Have we considered that? Well, in Greenland, you may not know this, but you do not own land. The government owns all the land. They just have a different system there. So, property values, a whole different way of looking at things. So the real estate expertise may not apply here. And geographically, you can see a cluttered landscape without realizing that you are there in July, perhaps. Half the year, it's covered in snow, and you can't even see that clutter. So that's something you may not be aware of. And lastly, nobody is walking around those areas saying, "Excuse me, I see you're a foreigner. Could you tell us, what we could do to make this look better?" Yeah, there's nobody ever asked me that. So, situation once again calls for me to shut up and watch and listen, and then I will perhaps understand better what is going on. Now, Greenland has been a protectorate of Denmark for quite a long time, and in 1973 they got home rule, which allowed them to control the government internally. And in 2011, I believe it was, they voted to become completely independent, but that's a process that will take some time. And if they're going to be completely independent, they need some income that they were getting subsidized by Denmark. So there's limited mining going on. There's been some oil exploration and things, and they're working on that. And there are significant uranium deposits known to be in Greenland, and the Greenland home government, they was thinking that if they exploited those resources, they could definitely generate some income, but that it's to do that without hurting the environment is quite difficult. Uranium being radioactive, if you've got these uranium tailings, you got to dump them somewhere, and that has consequences. There was others in Greenland who felt that they should not mine uranium, so that they value their land very much as part of their tradition, and by leaving the uranium in the ground, they avoid any environmental degradation there. Now, I would be willing to bet that in describing that situation, you, in your mind, immediately decided what the Greenlanders should do, whether to mine the uranium or not mine the uranium. And there is that word should. Well, let's put the toolkit to work here, okay? Are you an expert in mining, in international resource exploration, exploitation, something? Where's your PhD in that field? Have you considered the unique historical and cultural and geographic environment this uranium is located? That's a unique situation there. And lastly, has anyone asked you your opinion on what the Greenlanders should do regarding the uranium? And I'll bet the answer to all three of those questions in your case is no. Am I right? Now, I'll admit that when I first heard about that uranium situation, I had very strongly in my head an opinion that they should not despoil the landscape by mining the uranium. But I changed my tune on that. See, here are people who, for thousands of years, have survived in the Arctic. And the Inuits have their own way of doing things. They're very resourceful people, and they've survived. You can't take that away from them. So now we have a situation where, to survive, to continue to survive, they're faced with this resource they have in the ground, but that trade-off and how to preserve their treasured landscape. And so how they're going to address that problem, I find that to be fascinating. And my opinion as to what they should do is irrelevant. It doesn't even come up in the equation. Who cares what I think? I want to know. I'm pulling up my chair. I want a front row seat. Wow, check this out. Here are these people that are very resourceful, know what they're doing to survive, and now they have the situation. I'm fascinated. I want to know. I want to see what they do. It looks really cool. What I think they should do, irrelevant. Not even up for discussion. I'm just going to shut up and watch and listen, and then I will learn something. Back in Dubcast number 14, I did a song called Selarsawak Takuyuk, which is somewhat the unofficial national anthem of Greenland, and that was popularized by Nina, who's become a very well-known and respected singer in Greenland. And in her early days, this is maybe the late 1990s, she sang with a group called Kushlek, Q-U-L-L-E-Q, and they put out a couple of CDs. And one of the songs on that early period was called Upernanguara. I'd like to do a version of that for you right now. Here it is.
Upuna lepok, kiati lepok, nunanguara. Kamane tusia tulerami. Misigara kisalatok, ringo nerit. Kilana resa simasara. Asasara ilagalutit nuanalisara. Mani nunami ungana tumi. Sekinesu nueresu kingo matit. Nukisamik nutamik tunish dutit. Misigara kisalatok asani nerit. Kilana resa simasara. Asasara ilagalutit nuanalisara. Mani nunami ungana tumi. Asasara ilagalutit nuanalisara. Mani nunami ungana tumi. Asasara ilagalutit nuanalisara. Mani nunami ungana tumi.
So there is my version of Upernanguara. The word Upernok is springtime, and Upernanguara, one word, means my sweet spring, my sweet springtime. The lyrics draw an analogy between appreciating someone that you really love with that optimistic time in the spring when the good weather is coming and you're looking forward to a very nice summertime. The word kushlek, Q-U-L-L-E-Q, we would look at that and say Q-lek, but it's kushlek. It's got that double L sound that we don't have in English. That means a lamp, or it's also an adjective. It means the uppermost. And it's similar to, there's a word kashlek, K-A-L-L-E-Q, that looks similar to that word. That kashlek is the name of that Greenland paddle made by the Gear Lab company, my favorite model that they make, kashlek. And a kashlek is the Greenlandic word for thunder, different from kushlek. Kushlek's original 3 CDs, I think, are long since out of print, but they do have a compilation of all 3 of those CDs you can get in one package. Unfortunately, it does not have the lyrics printed out, which I was disappointed to see. But when I go to Greenland, I'll look for the tables in the markets, people selling their used stuff, and find CDs there. And I was able to find the second CD, which is called Misunderstandings, that translates to feelings. And that original CD had all the lyrics printed out in Greenlandic and in English. Back in Dubcast number 3, I said that I was making it my mission to have Greenlandic music heard and appreciated beyond Greenland. And at this point, I have done over 24 versions of Greenlandic songs, and one of them presented at each Dubcast at the end. And so I thought that next week we could take a retrospective look at those recordings, and I'll give you a medley of a whole bunch of them all together, and you can just listen to and maybe rediscover something or discover something you hadn't heard before if you missed some earlier Dubcasts, and perhaps get inspired to investigate some of this music further by, of course, going to atlanticmusic.gl. So you can look forward to that in episode 30.